Maybe this is familiar to you. This is my situation. In a time where I am struggling to manage relationships, family, friends, etc., with all this social distancing, in a time when I'm struggling with my own sanity at times, it seems, when I'm trying to help my kids learn away from school, learn digitally, learn online, manage the schedules, blended, in person, what's it going to be? My own sense of security as we watch these numbers of COVID rise and peak, our nation divided on how best to respond to it. It's awful. And in so many ways, I feel like I'm so preoccupied with my own anxieties, my own frustrations, I just can't see beyond my little circle. However, this week I am grateful. I am grateful that it's Christ the King and we get to hear this story of Jesus telling about what it means to be a disciple, what it means to see beyond our own needs and care for the most vulnerable in our midst, a kind of reorientation for me that I really needed. We know the story. You've heard it. There will come a day when God will separate the nations, judge the nations, sheep and goats, like a shepherd would separate sheep and goats. The sheep, it says, will go to my barn where they are cared for. The goats, not so much. Actually, it's pretty grim there. I always struggle with that one. But we get clarification of what this means to be a sheep or a goat. The sheep, God says, cared for me when I was sick, cared for me when I was a stranger, visited me when I was in prison. The goats, nope, didn't do it. And the both of them go, wait a minute, when did we do that? When did we do that? And he goes, oh, when you cared for the least of these, you cared for me. What you did to the most vulnerable, you did to me. And that leaves all of us historically asking ourselves, ooh, which one are we? A sheep or a goat? What kind of nation are we? Nation of sheep or a nation of goats? What are we? Do we care for the outcast? Do we care for the vulnerable? Did we welcome God as a stranger? Did we care for the guilty, for the sinner, for the prisoner? Or did we miss the mark? And as usual, I do think we're hopping a little further in the story than we need to. I think we've reduced it to, are you serving or are you selfish? Sheep or goat? I think that's just an oversimplification. It's like many steps ahead in the story. If it's about someday when God will do the judging, which is God's job, not our job. So if you're preoccupied with who's a goat, not your job. It's not your job. Our attention is missing the point of the rest of the story because the story isn't about what you are. The story is about what you see. What did those nations see and how did they respond to it? That's actually a question people ask in the Jesus story. When did we see that? When did we see you? Which is admitting they didn't see God. Which begs the question, were they looking? Are we looking? Because I would argue we're not so different. We struggle with this, whether we are seeing or not seeing, because sometimes we just aren't seeing because we aren't looking. I'll say this for myself. Sometimes I have too many coals in the fire, too many needs to attend to, too many expectations, real or otherwise, that I feel I have to look out for and I have to meet. To see a stranger or an outcast, okay, sure. If you really get right in my way, obviously, but do I even see the needs? Because oftentimes I just feel a bit selfish or a bit worn down, and I say, is that my job? Is this my responsibility? And then I want you to think about that person. Maybe they're crabby or overly critical, they're rude or they're negative, they're disrespectful or they're arrogant, and they're selfish. Heck, you name it. I want you to think about that. They could be awful human beings. We don't expect ourselves to look out, to care, to visit, to feed, right? I recall a story from a friend of mine who worked in an assisted living facility, and she often talked about this incredibly mean resident who would call her names, who would complain about everything she did. Just rude. And even after getting assistance from any other people, this resident would just belittle those people, everybody on staff. If they helped them, they also then say they would just come help them, they would also get this nasty tirade about them as they departed. It was wild. Needless to say, people had a very hard time being around this resident. Whenever they would notice the resident was in need of assistance, they would kind of sigh and steel themselves because they knew their job, but they knew they were also going to be confronted with a verbal assault. A lot of insults. Terrible. However, this friend said, I always knew they were mean, and some people had a hard time with them, but I mean, I still made it a priority, at least for me, to check in on them. Check in, not just when they needed something, but just to let them know I cared. To let them know that they were someone I loved. To let them know that I was not going to neglect them just because they were sour. They were in a tough stage of life, and they need care, and they need to know that I care. I want to think about that, right? Think about being in that position, and then think about being in the position of the person who is insulting everyone, needing assistance for so many things you used to be able to do yourself. I admit that I would be mad too if the only interactions I had were people who were helping me do things that I just couldn't do myself, feeling utterly helpless. If my only interactions with people when I was at my most vulnerable and my most frustrated. She knew this. This friend of mine. She understood this. She had that kind of vision that recognized the need in the most unpleasant and mean individuals and recognized, I don't need to just care for their pressing needs, but also check in. Not just tend to the physical, but visit with them emotionally. That's something. That is really cool. That's seeing things that are really easy to overlook. I don't think it's that hard to feed someone who's hungry, to care for someone who's hurt. I think that's a natural thing we'll do because obviously, if you've ever been hurt or you've ever been hungry, you know how it hurts and you know that it's right to care for people. I think that's obvious. I think we all do that well. And I bet you even the goats would be like, we've done that obviously. When did we ignore you? When did we ignore you? It was when you cared for the least. When you cared for the crabby. When you cared for the sour. When you cared for the people who you thought didn't deserve it, the people you would have considered goats. See beyond the people you love. See beyond the people who need things from you. Seeing beyond those obvious, pressing, clearly, demonstrably good things that you should do, and beyond even your own feelings towards other people of perhaps disgust. Beyond your own feelings of even contempt for someone. Even beyond your own fear of someone. And then by God's grace, expanding your own affection for them. That's sheep work. That's sheep vision. That's the big challenge for all of us. That's this thing that in the Benedictine tradition, the monastic order, there was this idea of the little ways. The little ways we imitate Jesus, and it's by doing that. Just expanding our vision beyond those fears and criticisms and critiques and seeing something else. Seeing in the sheep way, asking, God, it doesn't matter. I know that this is good, to care, to love, to expand my own affection for people who otherwise I have plenty of excuses to ignore, and saying, no, I don't have a good excuse. They are my brothers. They are my sisters. They are worthy of love and respect. That's the attention we get from this story, I think, that Jesus is trying to highlight. So if you're watching this and you're asking, so which am I, a sheep or a goat? Don't worry about it. Don't Don't. You're good. You're a sheep. So if you're a sheep, and you are, ask yourself, am I looking around? Am I practicing the little ways? Not just feeding people who are obviously hungry, but I mean the little ways of seeing beyond your own affection and expanding it even further. Am I looking around? Am I acting like one? Am I practicing these ways of looking? And a good way of checking if you are doing that is think of who you do not want to care about. Think about who it would be very easy for you to ignore, easy for you to overlook, easy for you to condemn, because that's where we're not looking. That's precisely where we are called to love. That's precisely where we are called to care, where we are called to spend time, called to visit, because that's where God is. They asked, when did we ignore you? It's when you ignored the least of these. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, you took care of me. I was a prisoner, and you visited me. This is the work of discipleship. The little things, the little ways of expanding our care. That's our challenge in the midst of this time as well. Beyond your own needs, beyond our own challenges and struggles. I'm saying this to myself. I need to be looking. I need to be on the lookout. I need to train myself. I need to practice these little ways of expanding my affection, of seeing God in my neighbors, even the crabby ones. And in doing so, maybe they'll see me too when I'm at my worst. See me when I'm challenging and struggling to be kind. And they'll say, he has a need. And I'm going to provide. That's the hope. That's what it looks like when Christ is King. Amen.